Running into the middle 80s. Kristen will tell you more coming up in this half hour. Also, we'll get a rundown on sports from our pal Dave. But right now, over to the phones we go, and our friend from the Chicago Tribune's editorial board and Rockford native, Kristen McQueary's on the line. Kristen, good morning to you.
Good morning.
How you doing this morning?
I'm great. I always get confused when you say Kristen's going to bring us the weather. I start to panic.
Well, what do you have?
Yeah, what do you know? Tell us.
Wrong Kristen.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll mark that off your skill set then. We won't lean on you for the latest weather conditions, but we will lean on you to tell us why we should be scared of Mike Madigan.
I don't think anybody should be scared of Mike Madigan. I think that's what emboldens him. And so that's kind of what you're seeing playing out in Springfield. And it's this constant tug because you have John Cullerton, who's the president of the Senate, who has been willing to deal a little bit with the new governor, Bruce Rauner. And every time he does, he gets his chain choked a little bit by Mike Madigan, who now has, a really personal vendetta against Bruce Rauner. Bruce Rauner ran commercials that specifically named Madigan as kind of the evil lord of Springfield. And so now that relationship is kind of tattered, you might say.
It was interesting this week, Kristen, or actually I guess it dates back to last week. The governor had nice things to say about John Cullerton. He was on this station talking to Michael Coolidge and said, John Cullerton, Senate President, has been interested in compromise. We've implemented some of his ideas in our bills. We're working together. It's Madigan who's standing in the way. The very next day was the John Cullerton press conference in which he trashed the governor for reading off a piece of paper and not calling leaders together. And was one a consequence of the other?
I think so. I mean, that's what I mean. I think anytime Madigan feels that he's getting frozen out or that his ally, John Cullerton, is working with Rauner, he sends a message. So Cullerton also had a bill that week that he was trying to get passed that would deal with school funding and property tax freeze and a bunch of things over here in Cook County. And even some of Cullerton's own members who are more loyal to Madigan pulled their votes. So that's kind of Madigan's way of sending a message. And yes, I think the John Cullerton press conference where he's all of a sudden calling Bruce Rauner, a corporate hack, basically, was his way of trying to set things straight with Mike Madigan because everyone fears him.
And, but bottom line, obviously, you wouldn't do this unless you somehow thought in the back of your mind that perhaps Mr. Madigan would wind up victorious in this stare down, and you want to make sure you're on the quote-unquote right side of history.
Exactly. I mean, and that's really what this is. We are in a 6-week, 7-week-long stare down. I don't see us ending it, getting out of it anytime soon. And Cullerton is really kind of, I think I said in a column, he's tiptoeing in a frying pan. He's trying to do right by the people in a way because he's trying to find some compromise with the governor, but he has to be allied with the Democratic leader in the House, Mike Madigan. Mike Madigan rarely loses. He does sometimes, but he rarely loses. And so, yes, Cullerton is trying to pick a winner here.
Kristen McQueary with the Chicago Tribune from the editorial board. It's Riley and Scott on WROK. We'll get back to John Cullerton in a moment because I know he stopped by the editorial board yesterday. But Mike Madigan had one of his weekly press conferences. This is so strange. He's talking to the press. No, I take that back. This was on the floor of the House. That's my fault. He was talking on the floor of the House this week before the vote on turning back the lawmaker pay raise and said this. This is Mike Madigan from earlier this week.
The governor has staked out a position. He has said, I want my diversionary issues, I want my non-budget issues, and then I'll talk about new money for a budget. That's the governor's position.
First, he did actually an admirable job of summarizing the governor's position, I think. But second, I find it really incredible, Kristen, that a guy who found it kosher to use the budget process to stash $35 million taxpayer dollars in a Secretary of State account so he could take it later to use to build a school in his own district, now says non-budgetary items and diversions are bad. And hey, we have strict budgetary rules we have to stick with here on these negotiations.
I know. If you've watched Mike Madigan for as long as I have, it's almost hysterical to watch him try to make that argument because the budget process is never pure. They don't sit down and go through, DCFS only and then Department of Aging only. They've thrown in the Bears Stadium in the past. They've thrown in work rules for Chicago Park District. I mean, you name it, it has been thrown into the budget process. And even Cullerton, is working on a plan that deals with a property tax freeze and a bailout for CPS, things that have nothing to do with the state budget. So the idea that Mike Madigan is suddenly a purist. and oh, by the way, these items that the governor wants do have something to do with the budget because they deal with the overall economic climate and stability of Illinois and whether or not businesses want to come here. And that does impact our budget and how much we can spend and, how friendly we look to outsiders.
Well, and Kristen, I guess that's the thing that has us scratching our heads more times than not. When you look at the path that this state has been on, and we talked to the governor the other morning and brought this very point up, the path this state, this death spiral the state's been on for as long as it's been on, and you've got Mike Madigan essentially saying, just let's keep doing what we're doing the way I want to do it. We're just fine.
Yes, and he doesn't want to change anything. The only give that he has given the governor, and it's been small, was he brought a couple of property tax freeze votes to the House floor, but they weren't exact mirrors of what the governor wanted. Mm-hmm. But that's it. He doesn't want to change anything. He does not see the governor's election as, a clarion call from voters that they want the state to move in a new direction. He's just going to keep doing things the way they've always been done.
Kristen McQueary with us from the Chicago Tribune editorial board. It's Riley and Scott on WROK. Kristen, and you and the other editorial board members, graced by the presence of Senate President John Cullerton yesterday, spent an hour with you guys. What did you come away with from him in terms of how negotiations are going and how the budget stalemate might proceed?
I think I came away feeling like this is going to last a long time because even Cullerton, for the tiny little areas where he's willing to compromise with the governor, he is still sticking with Mike Madigan's talking points that they're not going to talk about term limits. They're not going to talk about redistricting. I mean, those are things that voters want. Mm-hmm. And basically Cullerton said, I don't agree with those issues. I think we have elections and that's term limits. So because he personally disagrees with it, he's not going to allow the millions of Illinois voters to weigh in on it. So there is still very much a wall of being stubborn, even coming from Cullerton, who is the more reasonable of the two sides.
And what are the chances of this sort of stubbornness coming back to bite someone in the rear end? Because as you pointed out, a clear plurality of voters would like to see these measures implemented, and the fact that you find them distasteful because it might affect your job doesn't hold with a lot of people.
It doesn't, but Cullerton basically said it. He said, if I put these issues on the House floor for a constitutional amendment, which, again, voters would have to go to the polls and approve. All that we're asking is put it on the ballot. Cullerton said, no. So this is what happens when you've been in Springfield for as long as they have. They rule the day. I think it's a very famous Shakespeare quote, being so great, I have no need to beg. So they really don't feel any need to, cater to the needs and wants of the public when it comes to those issues. And he was pretty clear they're not going to do it.
Kristen McQueary with us from the Chicago Tribune editorial board. Riley and Scott on WROK. Something that Cullerton, Senate President John Cullerton, told you guys, apparently, he does not believe the state's economic climate is as bad as Rauner thinks it is. On the same day that we see Mondelez International moving at least 600 jobs out of Illinois, out of Chicago, and, international, I suppose, this particular instance, but to Mexico. Why does John Cullerton think Illinois is not quite as bad as we should think it is economically?
I mean, this is the same person who 6-7 months ago said that we don't have a pension crisis.
Right.
The state is about to get downgraded again by the rating agencies, and that is a very big deal because we are in the bond market almost every other month, every few months, selling bonds for capital construction projects and new roofs on schools and new roads. And taxpayers, we get whacked because our credit rating is so low that the interest to repay all that debt just falls on our backs. So to say that we're in, he did say that. He said at one point, I think Illinois is in good shape or great shape. I can't tell how far in the cloud his head is, but it's just contrary to everything that we see. Basic math tells us we're not.
So you got the immovable force here saying that we're not going to do it. We're not going to implement the things that many voters would like to see happen. We're certainly not going to bend over for this governor at all. We're prepared to go. And you said that this could go on for a long time. What's a long time?
I would say so that Rauner just extended the employee contract talks with AFSCME, the state's biggest public employee union. So we've got 2 months that we kind of bought time before that whole crowd gets riled up. A judge just ruled that the state does have to continue to pay its Medicaid providers, and we are still paying our state workers. So between 60 and 80% of the state budget is still being, checks are still rolling out. I'm not feeling a pinch by the budget stalemate. I doubt either of you are. So, I think we're looking at veto session, maybe November, before providers really start to clamor and you see, treatment centers for autistic kids and things like that shutting down before we'll see some change, because there's no pressure point. The courts have kind of lifted that by allowing the state checks to keep rolling out.
Well, that kind of ruins my next question, which was what happens first, Illinois budget agreement or White Sox lose a game? Sounds like White Sox still might lose before the budget agreement's in place.
Do not lose your faith in the White Sox. You can lose your faith in state government, but do not lose your faith in the White Sox.
All right. Well, I'm a Cub fan, so I already have. Kristen, as always, we appreciate the fact you take time out of your morning for us. A little disappointed in your weather forecasting skills, but other than that, you nailed everything.
Thanks. I'll work on the weather.